Special council meeting to order for Monday, September 16th. This is our 5 o'clock meeting. We acknowledge that all council members are in attendance. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wendat peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Any declarations of conflicts of interest tonight? Seeing none, if you find yourself in conflict, please let us know. I need a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the published agenda for the special council meeting for Monday, September 16th. Moved by Deputy Mayor Shepley, supported by Councillor Hammond. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. We will go to public presentations, and CAO Suite will introduce Mr. Linton.
Thank you, Mayor Bondi. So council, tonight we have Kelly Linton with us from Linton Consulting, and he's here to present the final report for our organizational review. It's been about a 6-month process, and with a number of interviews from staff, yourselves were included. And I think it's a good document. In the agenda package for the public, the full report is there. Tonight Kelly's prepared an executive summary of it. And at this point, Kelly, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks for having me here, Mayor Bondi and members of council. It's good to be in Essex again. And firstly, congratulations on your completing the streetscaping project. I saw you had ribbon cutting and street looks great. That street over there looks great too. So is that Victoria? That's Irwin. That looks good too. So I'm impressed with the council's and Essex's ability to get things done here. Moving on, I'm not controlling the slides, right? You can help me on that. Perfect. Okay, good. We'll go to the agenda as soon as you get it up. There we go. So for the agenda today, this is a presentation. I'll look at the context, remind us about what the project purpose was, the approach that we took over the last 6 months, some highlights on the current assessment, recommendations, and then the implementation plan, the anticipated benefits. Then I can respond to any questions that you have. The executive summary that I'm going to go through is about 15 minutes. It just kind of brings things to a high level, but I know that you also have the final report, which I have here. So I'll be referencing page numbers in my executive summary and the final report if you want to dive into more detail. And then I'm available to ask whatever questions that you have from either the summary or the final report. So moving on to the next page, giving a little bit of context for us. I know the strategic plan probably feels like it was a long time ago. Essex was really quick out of the gate for this, so I applaud you for that. If you can believe it, I'm still doing 2 strategic plans for 2 municipalities right now. So you were really out of the gate, and we did some really good work together. And we had four different main goals: safe and reliable infrastructure, welcoming and caring community, jobs and economic opportunities, responsible and people-focused commitment. And so that leads us in to the next slide, which is the purpose for this project. So achieving strategic priorities is important because it sets your priorities, but the next step is, do you have the organizational capacity to achieve it? So this project is all about assessing whether the town of Essex has the resources, the skill sets, capacity, positive working environment, and organizational configuration to achieve the strategic priorities that you set as a council, and then develop an implementation plan to systematically implement the recommendations that we're going to be putting forward today. So next slide talks a little bit about our approach that we took. We use a very collaborative process for this organizational review, and not all organizational review projects use a collaborative process like this, but it's really important to me and to the success of this project that staff at all levels have an opportunity for input, because that's absolutely critical. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we did, and I know Doug mentioned them already. A project launch with the CAO and the CLT, corporate leadership team. Input sessions from town council. Feels like a long time ago where I was here, but good input from council. One-on-one interviews with all members of CLT. Functional group session, we held 14 of those, mostly in person. Staff questionnaire, we got some really good feedback, anonymous feedback from your staff team. Staff office hours, this was kind of unique. We give an opportunity for all members of staff to connect with me directly, which is great because sometimes you don't want to bring things up in a group session. So we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for all staff to contact me directly. And then ongoing working sessions with the CAO and the CLT. We took our time with this project. We really did. We wanted to make sure that we got things right. And so we had lots of interactive working sessions with the senior team just to make sure that this was a made in Essex organizational review and the model going forward. It doesn't just look good on paper, but it actually is going to achieve a really strong foundation for you. And we wanted to make sure that we use the right process to go down that path. Next slide. I wanted to provide a few highlights of the current assessment. You'll find more details on pages 41 to 82, and that's the appendix of the final report. That's the current assessment case for change appendix, and you see these. This is just a pulled up summary, a summarized version in these next two slides. Number one, leadership, the theme of leadership and decision making. Positive comments from council and staff about the performance of the CAO and CLT and providing effective leadership and managing the corporation. That came up time and time again. Really good to hear. Number two, customer service and external communication. Been significant improvement on that side over the last couple of years. However, there's a need to build internal capacity and skills to enhance customer service across the organization. So a consistent level of customer service across all programs, across all facilities. We needed to do something about that. Number three, teamwork and collaboration. Really positive internal communication from the CAO and CLT, and that's improved over the last few years. However, there is a need to break down functional silos within departments and across the organization. So some of our recommendations address that finding. Moving on to the next slide. Number four was roles, responsibilities, and workload. In 2017, in that organizational review, there was significant restructuring that happened, and feedback received from council management staff does indicate that the current 5-department structure that was established in 2017 is still working really well. Where we needed to focus on was the business units and the divisions within those departments. And that's where you'll see some of the recommended changes here. Workload is an issue in some business units. And there's a need to reconfigure several divisions to clarify roles, responsibilities, improve efficiency, and rebalance staff workloads. Number five was related to processes, practices, and systems. So a few process or functional gaps have been identified through the course of this project. And there is a need to take a look at the report of problem, system, and processes that fit underneath it. That came out in a number of our sessions. So it's a great system. There needs to be some back office work being done to make sure that what you're doing and behind the scenes, the workflow is attached to the really nice customer interface there. It really has to be streamlined a little bit. And we want to, in this project, even though this is not a process review project, we want to make sure that the responsibilities to kind of make some improvements to that process fit somewhere, that there's a home for it somewhere. Finally, succession planning and staff morale. Organizational morale has improved significantly since 2017. If you look in the current assessment, we did a comparison between 2017 and this project, and we saw a significant improvement in staff morale, asking the same questions then as we did now, and that's really, really good to see. However, these gains are a risk because directors' heavy workload in managing the day-to-day operations. It reduces their capacity to focus on advancing strategic priorities and effectively mentor their staff. There are also several pending retirements requiring a succession plan. So again, good work has been made when it comes to staff morale and succession planning. but you're at a point now where you have to take a look at some capacity issues that you have because you don't want to lose good staff, bottom line. Move to the next page. Next page starts to look at getting into recommendations. In the final report, you can refer to pages 8 to 31, and that is a detailed functional model. This is just a summary. A detailed function model, detailed organizational charts, and detailed recommendations are included on those pages. So I can answer whatever question you have on those. We spent a lot of time on this functional model with the senior team because it, as I mentioned, in kind of the session that I had when we kicked this project off, it's really important that your functional model things fit together, that the right functions are clustered together so that you can get some good synergies. And so we spent a lot of time with the senior team on this. And we did find that the departments created in 2017 are still working well. We have the Office of the CAO. It's basically stayed the same with a little bit of a change. Community services is working well. Corporate services, those back office enabling functions, that still works well with the functions that fit underneath there. Development services, we pulled together in 2017, planning, building, and economic development. That seems to be working well still. Infrastructure services in 2017, we split that off from development services, and that seems to be working well, looking after your corporate infrastructure. So capital projects fits there. The roads, the operations, drainage, environmental services, that still works really well together. And then the department, legislative and legal services. Since 2017, you've really bulked up this and you have a lot more capacity on the legal side. And we wanted to make sure that in this project that we leverage that new capacity. I think that's really important. And we made some changes there. So if you look on the screen there, anything that's in yellow is where we made some significant organizational changes. The grayed out part is basically with a few minor things, basically has stayed the same. Okay. And I don't think this should be too much of a surprise. And as we get through here, I think there's some alignment between what I heard from members of council early on in this project and what we heard during the strategic planning processes and what we ended up with. I think there's a alignment there. All right, so I'm just going to go through 12 recommendations in total. I promised you there wouldn't be 100 recommendations. I followed through with that. There's 12 recommendations. They're substantial recommendations. So what I want to do here is I want to go through every recommendation at a high level, explain what the recommendation is, the overall rationale behind it, and which phase I'm recommending that it be implemented within. You can go to the final report. There's a large section in the final report that just deals with the detailed recommendation. So I can answer whatever questions you have on the detailed recommendations as well as what's in the summary here. So I'm convinced that if you move forward with these 12 recommendations, which I'll get into in a second, you have a very strong foundation for long-term organizational success. Okay, we pulled together a functional model with recommendations, making sure that we recognize that we could not add significant numbers of staff to this organization. I know council has a strong preference because you want to make sure you're avoiding staff costs and staff increases. So we've been very cautious about that. We've been very conservative in adding staff. And we made a significant revisions to some of the staff, and you'll see in the final report where we've revised. We've done a listing of the new positions, 4 new positions, and then the revised positions, and about I can't remember off the top, but I'll go there in a sec. There's a number of revised positions, and you'll see what those are in the final report. Okay, so let's get into recommendation 1. So recommendation 1 is create a customer experience working group as a cross-departmental community of practice chaired by the manager strategic communications. The purpose of this group is to improve the customer experience across all facilities and all programs and services. So this is an innovative recommendation. It doesn't change the organizational structure. It overlays a community of practice on top of the structure, putting your manager strategic communications in charge of a group that's made up of key individuals across all the departments. Key success factor for this recommendation is they meet monthly, not more, not less, and that the directors provide opportunities for these managers who are on this group to be able to treat this as a priority. The thinking behind putting the manager of strategic communications to oversee this group is because I think there's a real strong synergy between messages out and messages in. So customer service and the messages you put out in terms of external communication and promotion, there's a lot of consistency there, and there needs to be alignment there. And the skill set, the communication skill set, is a very similar skill set as the customer experience skill set. You're thinking about it from the community's perspective. And I think this is a really, really strong synergy. We had a lot of discussions about this. It's got to be a working group, so it doesn't have directors on it, it has managers on it. But it's important that the manager, the chair of this committee with this working group, reports directly to CLT and the CAO with any suggestions, recommendations from a customer experience standpoint. So it bypasses in a hierarchy and goes directly to the senior group. It ramps up the importance of the customer experience in a structured way, without completely changing the organizational chart. Rationale is, it came up time and time again, there's good customer service and then there's not so good customer service. It depends on where you're at. There needs to be a focus and an accountability for customer service across all functions, across all facilities. This would do that. I'm recommending this early on in phase 1. Oh yeah, I'm not controlling this. I'm looking for my mouse to go ahead. I'm not used to not having control. I'm a bit of a control freak. Next recommendation, thanks. Recommendation 2 is establish 2 business units within parks and facilities, each led by an assistant manager position. Assistant manager of parks and projects with the responsibility to manage outdoor operations and minor capital projects, and the assistant manager of facilities and events with responsibility to manage indoor operations and event coordination oversight. Rationale behind this: current split between the north and south operations has resulted in some inefficiency and duplication of effort. We got to clean that up. The recommendation for a new assistant manager facilities and events position would help reduce significant overtime hours of the director of community services and the manager of parks and facilities by sharing community event duties across the board in very specific areas. This was one of the areas that I think needs to be moved on fairly quickly. The current situation is not sustainable. Staff are getting burned out. Your overtime hours are excessive, and there is a need to do something about this. This is one of the few positions that we're recommending moving forward with. I put that down for phase 1. Next slide, please. Recommendation 3. And again, the recommendations, as you can see, are based on department. So we're dealing with community services right now. Shift responsibility to manage complex major projects from community services to infrastructure services capital projects business unit. Rationale behind this one: currently managing internal capital projects consumes significant time and effort, especially in community services. Director of Community Services, Manager Parks and Facilities, and Assistant Manager Parks and Facilities. And for those minor capital projects, it makes sense for it to be there. For major capital projects, I'm putting a recommendation out there that you have an engineering group already set up in infrastructure services. It makes more sense based on the skill set and the capacity that you have in that other department that they should be handling major capital projects. The skill set's the same, project management is the same regardless of what kind of project it is. You still have to go through the same process. You still have to do the tendering, procurement. You still have to be dealing with vendors and the different complex procurement opportunities that you have to do. It's a very similar process. I'm saying that it doesn't make sense to be doing duplicate kind of activities in 2 different departments. So I'm saying that the major projects, that recommendation is to shift that over. One of the things that did came up in the sessions is that it's really important for the community services related projects that staff from those departments still are involved in the project right till the end. That's absolutely critical because they're the subject matter expert. That doesn't mean that they have to be the manager of the process. So the manager of the process for complex capital projects would fall to infrastructure services. Oh yeah, 4. Thanks. Recommendation 4, add capacity in fire services in alignment to the fire master plan. Again, we want to make sure that we're leveraging work you've already done. Just recently done a fire master plan, and they recommended moving forward to a full-time position for the fire clerk. And the other piece of community service that we identified that we need to do a little bit more research on is potential staff capacity when it comes to the recreation and cultures program coordination function. So the rationale behind that, for the fire, it's consistent with the fire services master plan. And then there's an internal assessment that's required for the recreation and culture program to ensure that staff daily activities are consistent with the job description, roles, and responsibilities that we have in place. There's a little bit of work that has to be done internally on that front before we recommend any increase to staff on the recreation and culture side. There's a little bit of internal work that has to be done there. Next page, recommendation 5. Now we're switching gears to corporate service. Kate's Empire. Okay, so the recommendation here is establish 2 business units by upgrading the assistant manager finance to become manager revenue and front desk services, and revising the manager finance and business services to become manager financial services and budgets. Revise the assistant manager business services title to assistant manager procurement and contract. That just reflects more of that person's actual duties. So the rationale behind this is we're addressing a current lack of role clarity in corporate services by establishing 2 different business areas with very distinct areas of focus. The first one is on revenue analysis and day-to-day transactions and customer service, so that day-to-day work that's being done. And then the second one is more long-term financial planning, budgeting, and asset management, those things that are longer term. Right now, that's all kind of intermingled, and you have positions doing both. That's frustrating. It's not sustainable. There needs to be a division in those 2 functional areas with the manager of each, so that there's clear accountability for those 2 distinct functions. Again, this is another recommendation that we went back and forth with a lot with your senior team. We wanted to make sure that this worked. Not only did it make sense functionally, but it did work with the people that you had there. So this is one that I'm recommending moves ahead in phase 1. On to recommendation 6. Merge all town hall customer service, reception, bill payment functions together under one manager of revenue and front desk services. Pull all customer service that you have here under one manager, so that customers don't have to go to 3 different areas to get support. The thinking is that customers shouldn't have to do that. Your customers should be able to go to one counter and then internally figure out how you're going to give them the best practice rather than having them hop from counter to counter. I think this is critical. It came up in a lot of this interviews. What's happening now doesn't really make sense, and it's happening for some natural reasons, but we felt like a change was needed in order to provide better customer service. So the rationale is to address current customer service issues by establishing a single team focused on providing one window approach to customer service, and eliminates the silos that currently exist among staff in this department. And it also will be, there's also a lot of alignment to the single counter that you'll have and when you move ahead with your town hall change as well. Okay. Recommendation 7. Centralize the coordination and oversight of the asset management within corporate services. Create a new assistant manager financial analysis and planning with responsibility to support budgeting and long-term planning, coordinate and oversee asset management, track and coordinate the grant application reporting process. So the rationale behind this is we're trying to address an urgent and time-sensitive need to apply to provincial requirements when it comes to asset management. You need to do the current organizational setup that you have right now will not get you to where you need to be. You have good staff who are working really hard to do what needs to be done. But there's a change needed in the structure to make sure that you're going to be successful in effectively merging your asset management with long-term financial planning, with budgeting, and making sure that you have a stronger function within corporate services to do that. I'm recommending that is implemented in phase 1. See that as being absolutely critical. Going on to recommendation 8, create a new IT systems analyst position reporting to the manager IT with responsibility to oversee the town's technology systems. Bottom line, and it was one of those things that came up over and over again, probably in the top 3 issues when I was talking to staff, is IT support and IT systems and moving ahead with the IT function. So with you have 2 full-time resources right now in comparison to the similarly sized municipalities that we've taken a look at. And you can see in the appendix, in the final report, the appendix that I mentioned, you're an outlier when it comes to your IT resources right now. And that has to, in order to use technology to make the most efficient and effective processes, you're going to need more staff for that. And you also have a new IT strategy that needs to be implemented. There's no way that your current resources can move ahead with the pretty significant recommendations that came out of that IT strategy with the 2 resources that you have right now. Okay, moving on to recommendation 9. And we're shifting over to from Corporate Services and Development Services Department. Recommendation 9 is to shift bylaw from Development Services tied in with building to Legislative and Legal Services. And transition the full-time and part-time bylaw enforcement officers to report to the manager, a revised position that I'll get into in a minute, revised position manager, legal and licensing enforcement. So no new staff here. It's a shift of a function over. The rationale behind it, significant demand for bylaw enforcement right now. It came up in the council session for sure. It came up in the strategic planning session that we had. And it came up with staff as well, to effectively enforce your bylaws and your property standards. It's requiring significant time and attention from staff. And there's a disconnect right now between what's happening in the legal and legislative services department and where bylaw currently fits. It doesn't work anymore the way it should. Like, there's a reason that smaller municipalities have building and bylaw together, because there's some synergies between enforcing the building code and enforcing bylaw. But that's as you grow and mature as an organization. And now that you've built on significant capacities on the legal side of things, it no longer makes sense to have that kind of small town model. It makes more sense to have all bylaws and all legislative services connected with the enforcement of them. So it makes a lot of sense. And we had a significant number of conversations about this, both with your staff, your bylaw enforcement official, and with the directors who are involved in this right now. And this is a configuration that is in keeping with trends, and it makes a whole lot of sense for Essex, given that you have the capacity that you have from a legal perspective. Moving on to recommendation 10. This looks at economic development. So expand the manager economic development position to include strategic initiatives. Create a new analyst economic development and business relations contract position to report to this manager. So strategic initiative and the rationale behind it, strategic initiatives, potential alternative revenue generation opportunities, corporate sponsorship, business relations were all identified as gaps. So what we're trying to do with this one position, we're trying to use this one additional position to address several functional gaps that came up. And the analyst economic development and business retention, it's a contract position for year one, paid for through, and the grant match software paid for by the provincial government in year one. So this is a really good pilot project. And I think you're going to cover off a lot of those strategic initiatives that you've identified in the strategic plan, but have no staff capacity to actually achieve them right now. So by expanding a current role that you have, the economic development role, and having that role oversee strategic initiatives as well, there's a nice fit there without adding significant staff capacity. And again, because of the timing of that potential grant from the province, the implementation is recommended in phase one. Second last recommendation, recommendation 11. And now this is looking at a similar kind of move, but from the infrastructure services perspective. So we've shifted into the infrastructure services department. So refocus the capital works and asset management business unit on managing capital projects and supporting asset management activities. And this will require revising the job descriptions of the manager and assistant manager positions to reflect that change. In addition, upgrade the infrastructure services clerk to a full-time position, increase the complement of public works operations to address current staff issues. So the rationale behind this is addressing the current infrastructure services. They're currently performing finance-related tasks that fit better in corporate services. Corporate services and infrastructure services there's overlap in what they're doing. That's got to be cleaned up. There has to be, in my mind, there has to be ownership of asset management, coordination, and oversight needs to fit with finance. It's a better fit. It's way too tied back to long-term financial planning, to budgeting. So it needs to be coordinated out of corporate services. Not saying that infrastructure services doesn't need to play a really strong supporting role, because most of your assets are in infrastructure services. So the support of asset management has to stay with infrastructure services, but the coordination, the oversight, and owning the process needs to flip over to finance. They're currently already having to do a lot of that work by default. And so sometimes when you look at what's actually happening, you have to take a look at, oh, well, why is it actually happening? Okay, so maybe it's a better natural fit for asset management oversight and centralization to be in corporate services tied to financial planning. So that's the recommendation here. And then to focus on that group's, that business areas skill set, engineering and project management. So taking off some of the asset management coordination from it gives them space to now take on more of the complex capital projects, which is where their skill set is. They're engineers. That's what they do. So that gives you a really solid center of excellence for capital projects, complex capital projects, taking that off some of the other departments, primarily community services. And recommending that certain things have to happen before you get to this recommendation. So the implementation recommendation is for this in phase 2. Last one, recommendation 12, establish 2 business units in legal licensing and enforcement. Sorry, one is legal licensing and enforcement. The second is legislative services. Revise the manager positions to reflect those role revisions. Shift one of the current customer service reps that currently report in to the clerk, to the deputy clerk, shift that over to corporate services, and then that becomes a legal and legislative clerk position reporting into that director. So the rationale behind this recommendation, there's a few pieces to it, so we can talk a little bit more about this when we get into the question time. But the rationale is increased demand for bylaw enforcement. The configuration is consistent with municipal government. One of the things that we talked a lot about with the senior team is they're requiring that the manager, legal and licensing and enforcement is a lawyer, because that will save significant, about 70% of the cost of external solicitor services, which will pay a portion of that change in the staffing. About $55,000 a year it will save, we're estimating. And it will help with the liaison and discussions with the appeals committee, because you have all that functional expertise internally, in-house. And because there's several sub recommendations there. The implementation is recommended over phases 1 and. Okay, so that's the recommendations. The second piece from, and you'll see that on pages 27 to 40 is the implementation plan. So we've broken, the next page, please. So broken into the phases into 2 phases. The first one is called foundation building. And I'm suggesting that those recommendations can be implemented in the first 6 months. Focus on making some immediate improvements to address urgent issues, challenges, and build positive momentum for change. And then the second phase is that takes you over the next 3 years. Addresses increased demand from community growth by building internal capacity to deliver. So that phase I've termed capacity building. Phases 1, I have recommendations 1, 12, 2, 5, 6, and 10. The reason they're out of order is because that's the sequence that I've recommended them being implemented. And then phases 2, I have the rest of the recommendations 9, 8, 7, 11, 3, and 4. The estimated costs for phase 1, I have at $184,504, and I worked with Doug and Kate on these numbers, so we know they're fairly accurate. And then phase 2, which is spread over 3 years, $530,854. So that's the cost of moving forward with these recommendations. The next 2 pages, I won't get into that much detail, but I can answer whatever questions that you have. Next page, please. Yep. So there's the cost broken down. And these are also, these tables are also in the final report, broken down. Every phase has been estimated out. And that's cost for phase 1 for 6 months, and then phase 2 over 3 years. It's been costed out. Next page, please. So with these recommendations, the goal has been to strike the right balance between limiting new staff requirements, but still developing a very solid foundation for future success. The intent was to do this organizational review really well so that you don't have to do another one for another decade. Like that's what we tried to do here, is we want to make sure the functional model, all the recommendations hung together, that it made sense. You might have to do a tweak here, you might have to do a tweak there, but this sets you up with a really, really strong foundation of functions that are clustered together in a way that makes operation. So I'm putting forward that the idea is that we want to make sure this is a long-term, a sustainable organizational structure. So some of the benefits I think of moving forward with this, more effectively clustering activities and functions, and this will reduce role duplication and overlap. It'll improve operational effectiveness and achieve more positive outcomes, because you're making sure that each of your different directors and the managers underneath those directors have very clear accountability for specific functional outcomes. It'll improve customer service expectations and standards by establishing that cross-departmental customer service community of practice. I think that's really good recommendation to move forward with very quickly. It addresses some significant capacity workload issues in community services, parks, and facilities division, where the current situation is not sustainable. It addresses several current functional gaps by strategically increasing staff complement, adjusting roles, responsibility, and clustering functions more effectively. And lastly, It demonstrates that people are valued by implementing recommendations to address current workload issues and provide interesting career path options. We've done some interesting things with positions, and I think that's good from a staff career perspective. So that's the last slide there.
Thank you. Thank you. CAO Sweet.
You, Mayor Bondi, and thank you, Kelly. I think through my career, what you've done in terms of organizational review has set us up for success. You looked at efficiencies for us and gave us a roadmap. I know Mayor Bondi's going to open it up to questions, but before that, so Kelly went through his recommendations and all that, but attached to the special meeting is a report from administration. And I do want to point that out that we do have some recommendations that are a little different than what Kelly presented. So we do agree with phase one, but with that, and if it's page 4 of the report, very limited costs in those. And the one that did have a cost was the Parks and Rec adding that assistant manager position. And what we're recommending is it's still part of phase one. It'd be our next step, but we move that to budget 2025 for discussion. And any other position after would always come back to council during budget for discussion. So I think page 4 is key. Have a look at that too. I mean, ask Kelly some questions while he's here. In terms of what administration is recommending, it's only 2 positions really add on, which is just additional duties. It's not new positions. So to get us through and get working, especially with bylaw and the changes in finance and customer service. So that thing, turn it over, maybe a question.
Before we go to questions, let's just receive the presentation by Kelly Linton, partner. So looking for a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Councillor Verbeek, Councillor Allard, and then we will go to questions after that. All in favor just to receive the presentation? That is carried. Now moving on from our report from our CAO. There are several recommendations there. Looking for questions from members of council to our consultant or to our CAO, and then I'll seek direction. Questions from members of council. Deputy Mayor.
Madam Mayor, I'm just wondering if our CAO could expand on the 2 positions, what the expansions are exactly, and what that will mean for our budget next year. Because once we add it tonight, I'm assuming it'll carry over year, and what that increase would be.
I'll address the first part of your question, then I'll turn it over to Director Jusevich on the second part. So with those 2 positions, one is currently in legal and legislative. Previously was our assistant manager, has been vacant for 6-7 months. We knew an organizational review was coming, and we wanted to not fill a position until this came. What we found, and as Mr. Linton mentioned, we have a lot of external legal cases, and that's growing every year. So we looked at a way we could add a legal component to that position, and there's a bump up of a few thousand. So I'll let Director Jusevich expand on that more after. And the second position was, as Kelly mentioned, in our finance. To divide that in, it'd be a bump up because the one role would now always take the customer service component in terms of overseeing all the frontline staff. So we have some consistency. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with planning, building, finance, water billing, how we approach customer service would be consistent. Director Jusevich, in terms of the budget part of that.
I apologize. I don't see the report actually attached to the agenda of the meeting. It's at the bottom. Just bear with me 1 second.
Other questions from other councillors while we wait? Councillor Mabey.
Through your chair. So I see moving the high cost into budget deliberations. I think that's a great idea. In phase 2, there's 2 that have 0 cost to them. Is there any reason why we can't move those up to get them done within 6 months instead of having to wait 3 years to complete those changes that have no cost?
So one was bylaw enforcement. One reason is you need the manager we just talked about to be in place. Once that position's in place, it was a matter of capacity. So with town hall expansion, we're looking at maybe a time that and everybody be in one building. But this could move up once that new position is in place, probably a couple months after that, we could move bylaw over there. Second one, major capital projects, as Mr. Linton said, it's just some other things are shifting in terms of asset management. Once all that's taken place with finance and corporate services, we could look at implementing that.
Sorry about that. So to answer your question, Deputy Mayor Shepley, the annualized cost is approximately $46,705. And the thought behind that would be that increase in new builds and new construction should be able to fund that substantially.
Question on recommendation 9. When we move because right now our chief building inspectors are chief bylaw officer too, if I'm correct in that. Is that correct? So when we move that over to legal and legislative, would he remain on as our chief bylaw officer? And if not, would we be promoting somebody at that point in time? Would that change that position that he's in and then he'd be reduced, or I'm not sure. I'm just trying to understand how that would work.
Mayor Bondi. So currently, yes, our chief building official does bylaw. He would now become our permanent chief building official and could focus his time on building. We would move our full-time, part-time, and our 2 part-time over to this role. So just those 3 roles.
So one of them would then be our chief bylaw officer at that time, and then would that be a pay raise increase for them at that time?
Your Mayor Bonnie, no, they would report now to that new manager position.
Through the mayor to our CEO. So, so I got this right. The phase 1 recommendations, it looks like only 12 and 6 are what we're going to actively pursue in the next 3 months, and the rest are going to be pretty much held off until budget. Am I reading that right?
No, we would do R1 customer experience. So our manager of communications would take the lead on that. He would just now champion our customer service, kind of our policies. What are our practices? 12, you're correct. R5, we would. R6, R10. The only one we would not be doing there is R2.
Yeah, through mayor. Yeah, okay, and I'm reading. So that's what the zeros mean. No, there's just no change in. Okay. And then on R12, can you just explain one more time if you haven't? I don't know if I heard it. The difference in the numbers I'm reading here. Estimated annual cost $60,373. Critical recommendations $10,935. I'm not understanding that.
Through the chair, so it's assuming instead of an annualized cost to start date of October to December. And the estimated savings wouldn't be quite a quarter because it would take some onboarding for that new position to get familiar.
Thanks through the chair. So we're looking to add approximately, if we go with the recommendation with CAO's recommendation, $44,000 to the annual budget for 2025. What is that percentage wise? Like, we're going to have to increase taxes because that's something that's not there. So what does that increase look like? Like, what's that percentage? Sorry.
Thank you through the chair. So the plan right now would not be to increase taxes and not have taxes increase because of this. So each year we have growth from building, right? So we have new builds that come on. We're approximating the growth to be in and around $200,000 this year. So that money would be used to offset this.
So what did we use that $44,000 this year in 2024? What did we use that for that we're not going to get in 2025?
I'm not sure I understand where you're headed. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So last year we had, I don't know how much we got in the fees that for building. We got 200,000, let's say in 2024. Obviously we spent that money on something. Now we won't have 200,000 to spend. We'll have 150,000 to spend. So what do we normally spend those funds on?
Chair. So typically those head towards inflationary increases. So increases we see in utilities, increases we see in insurance. One thing that we are seeing this year is insurance is not as high as we predicted in the past. Usually it was 20%, 15%. It came in at around 7%. So typically those head towards inflationary increases.
Where I'm going with this through the chair is the money that we had for the inflationary, we won't have anymore. Implementing this, we will be less 44,000. To say that it doesn't affect our taxes is an unfair statement because it does. We're taking from something and we're going to have to replace it with something. So I want that to be clear to everybody that this does affect taxes. You're not saying that this is going to cause an increase, but removing it from the inflationary might cause us an increase this year because we don't have a budget yet.
That's an absolutely fair statement. What I can say is typically any salary increases that are done because of a result of a non-union position, we do have to use that money for as well. So non-unionized positions can come forward, state that they perhaps aren't getting paid fairly, and we would have to use the growth money towards that as well.
To add on, Councillor McGuire Blaze question, I think it was answered. Just to highlight too, though, we are having a savings of 55,000. I think that's actually conservative for legal costs, what we experienced the last few years. That's what we have now. We're probably going to end up 70,000 this year. So there are savings we're making there by keeping that in-house as well.
Sweet. There are several recommendations in front of us that the Office of the CAO report be received, that council endorse in principle all recommendations within the Town of Essex Organizational Review Final Report as presented by Linton Consulting, that council approve the recommendations within Phase 1 foundation building except for R2, which will be brought forward during budget, that council review all the recommendations within the Town of Essex Org Review Report during budget over the next 3 years, and that council approve the 2024 post-budget expense in the amount of 16,000 to be funded from the town salary stabilization reserve. Looking for a mover and a seconder on those said motion or direction. Okay, Councilor McGuire, please.
I don't want to, through the chair, I don't want to move this. I'm really hesitant to do it because I haven't seen the 2025 budget, and to just say, I know you just said there's a savings, but for me, I feel like I would like to see the 2025 budget before I go ahead and approve this. But that's my personal opinion. Just because it sounds great now, but we haven't seen what inflation has done this year. And I've only been on council for 2 budgets, and the budgets always come as way higher than anything that we've ever thought. So for me, I would like to postpone this until we can fit it into the budget and see what 2025 brings. It's only 3 months away. We're doing budget in 3 months, so I don't see why we can't wait 3 months for this. But if somebody else wants to move it and pass it, then so be it.
Looking for other comments from council. I think one thing I do want to say is I going into budget, I'd love to see some data on our overtime hours, because that really does concern me. If we have a lot of overtime hours in departments, we can't continue to keep staff in high levels of overtime. I also think it's important. This really ties into me with the strategic plan. And maybe because I've been here for several org reviews now, I see that there is merit to doing this exercise. And the focus here is really customer service. And that's something that we highlighted in our strategic plan. So if we want to see customer service results, we need to move on this sooner rather than later, because that's really what we've highlighted in our session with you and all along. So looking for further comments, questions from members of council. You have the decision-making authority in front of you, council. Councilor Verbeek. Looking for a seconder. Councilor Hammond. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Councilor McGuire, please, do you want that noted? Okay, thank you. At this point, we will have a motion to adjourn our special council meeting. And thank you for the report. And we look forward to working on the initiatives. Motion to adjourn by Councilor Maney, Deputy Mayor Shepley, all in favor. And that is carried. We'll see you at 6 o'clock.